Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Trish Boateng. I'm the support coordinator for Newburyport Rec and Youth Services. We are so proud to be part of the city's Pride celebration this month, and I can't think of a better way to kick it off than having SpeakOUT Boston with us here tonight. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome.
Hi everyone, my name is Jace Kirshner. I use they and them or he and him pronouns, and we are members of SpeakOUT Boston. It's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, LGBTQ A+ speakers bureaus in the country. It was founded in 1973, which means we are officially over 50 years old now. And we go about this work by telling the truths about our lives. So what we do here today, we're going to speak, each one of us, for a little while, and then we're going to turn it over to you to ask questions. And the whole point of that is that we really want you to get to know some actual living LGBT people, and then also have an opportunity to really ask questions and get to know us, get to know about our lives, ask questions that you might not feel comfortable doing so in another setting. Here, I'm going to turn it over to...
Hello everyone, my name is Keelan Henderson. My pronouns are she, they, and just want to go over some very basic ground rules for the entire session today. First and foremost, what we like to say at SpeakOUT is that we are only here telling our own personal stories. We are not speaking on behalf of anyone else. We are only speaking about our stories that we've experienced. And the second rule is to please have respect between ourselves and the audience. Make sure that that is just something that you're practicing. And the final thing is please ask us anything. So when we get to the Q&A part, when we say ask us anything, we truly mean ask us anything. If we are uncomfortable, we will let you know and not provide an answer, but I think I've spoken with both Jason and Aiden, and I'm pretty sure we're all very open when it comes to questions, so please ask us anything.
We'll get to Aiden later. Okay. So hi everyone. Again, my name is Jace, as I said already, and I identify as a trans man. So, and if you need more information on that, what that means is that I was born, doctor saw me, said, "It's a girl," and at some point, sometime later said, "You were wrong." And now I look like this. I have a bunch, like, this is parent to parent, obviously, so we are thinking about our stories in a way that actually addresses potentially some of your questions as parents. I will say for just, I have a fantastic relationship with both of my parents. It has gone on a journey. It has been a wild ride in some cases for us all together. And I know that we have two other folks who are also going to be talking about that, so I'm not going to talk about my relationship with my parents now. If you have questions about that, you can certainly ask, and I will happily answer them. But what I really want to talk about is actually my relationship with my sister. Because my sister is a parent to 3 young kids. I guess they're not quite so young anymore. The oldest is 16, which freaks me out every time I tell this because he gets progressively older and I have to keep adjusting. The story there, oh my gosh, he's 16. So the oldest is 16, the middle one is 13, and the youngest is 10. And I came out as trans in 2011, and if you can do some quick math, that means that the oldest one was 4 years old, 3 years old, something like that. And when I came out, the big thing that my sister was worried about is that she and her husband have very strong Catholic beliefs. And they were very much of this opinion that they had to give their kids, and the other two when they came along, this very, this Catholic background. They needed to have a Catholic understanding about the world before they could learn other things, because they were afraid that if they didn't get a Catholic upbringing at first, if they didn't learn these Catholic mores, that then they would never get another chance to really learn those at other points in their lives. So that's what they were concentrating on. So I came out as trans, and it was a struggle for me because I was having this experience where I was really coming out for the first time. I was 30 years old, and it was wonderful for me to really be able to live really authentically up here in Boston. But then every time I went home to see my family in Pennsylvania, I couldn't be anymore. Like, it was like, they recognized me as, you know, Uncle Jace. They knew that I was not a woman, but they also didn't know that I was trans. So I had this incredible erasure of everything prior to that point. You know, there's this anecdote of, like, I went to my grandmother's 90th birthday party in Ohio, and I'm sitting in this chair, and you know how grandparents do, they have pictures of you from when you were like this big and you're now 40, but they still have these pictures of you from when you were a baby. And behind me on the wall is a picture of my sister at like age 5, both of my cousins, around the same age approximately, and then a picture of me with long, flowing, curly locks, big blue eyes, like in this little dress, kind of like doing some sort of prayer thing. And my nephews were there because it was my grandmother's 90th birthday, so we were all in Ohio for this occasion. And my nephew Jack points to me and is like, Uncle Jace, who are those people? Okay, so that's your cousin Jen, and that's your cousin Liz, and that's your mom, look at her hair, oh my gosh, isn't that wild? And I erased myself in that moment, right? So there's a lot of this like erasure piece, but that was hard, but honestly what was harder was recognizing over time, as these boys were getting older, they were still not getting any different message about trans folks from their parents because they weren't ready to hear it. My argument is that was my sister and her husband were not prepared to have that conversation. Those kids were ready to hear it, but they were not ready to have the conversation with them. And so for a long time, like, and over this course of this last, 12 years or so, we've been seeing as society this swing and this upsurge of like anti-trans legislation, people trying to ban things from libraries, people who are, taking away gender-affirming care, whether you're a kid or an adult, it's happening across this country. And I'm still sitting here listening to my sister saying, they're not ready to hear this. And I'm like, well, if not now, when? And where are they getting information about trans people? If you're not telling them and you're not communicating to them anything, there's a void there. And they're going to fill in that information somewhere. These boys have access to the internet. They live in this world. They're going to hear things. So who is in control of the narrative that these boys are getting? We kind of came to a head. Actually, I was on the train. It was last year, before Pride. We were on the Red Line. We were going in to go to the Pride for the People event last year. And my sister called me, and we were planning on, for the first time, Aiden and I are partners, and Aiden was going to come with me to our family vacation in Chincoteague, Virginia, which is quite a haul from here to get to there. It's about 10 hours of travel time altogether. And I was really nervous about this trip because it was the first time that Aiden was really going to spend time with my nephews. Aiden uses they and them pronouns. That's a bit of a giveaway, sorry, for future. But, and my sister was like, well, Leo, who's the youngest one, might accidentally she Aiden. And I said, well, then we will very gently correct him to say, actually, it's they. And she said to me, I wish you wouldn't. And I lost it. Because at that moment, not only was it that I realized that I had been holding this for 12 years, but now I'm going to have my partner also have to deal with this. And I can't, there's a line I cannot cross anymore. And I like broke down and I was like, we can't keep doing this. This cannot continue being how this goes. And the result from that, actually, after 12 years of all of this, is that she finally got it. She was like, I finally started to understand like what it might actually be like to think about that emotional stress that you were putting yourself under and really putting other people first for all that time and how hard that must have been. She actually equated it to being a parent. She's like, you always you erase yourself for the sake of other people, and how must that be to feel that way? So I will leave it there, and I will pass it on to Keelan.
Thank you so much, Jace. As I said before, I've actually spoken with Jace, and that's the first time I heard that story. So, one of the benefits of doing this is for Speak Out. You kind of hear new things each time you speak with new people or the same people, and it is, it's awesome. So thank you. All right. So I think where I like to kind of start is just giving a little context into my childhood and kind of where I am now. So for everyone here, just to give some information and context, I'm currently 30, and I only came out about 3.5 years ago, but I knew since I was probably, I don't know, 4, 5, younger, that I was gay. But just because of certain experiences, I pushed that down as much as I could for as long as I could. There was a specific moment actually when I was in, I want to say like 2nd or 3rd grade, and I remember it was with my soccer team, and we were all at someone's house for like a pasta dinner type of deal, and we were in the tree house, and as we were going back into the house for dinner, I had a couple of girls on the team taunting me, and just kind of saying, oh, Keelan has a crush on Rachel, Keelan has a crush on Rachel, which I know happens, and I'm not like, yeah, I'm not oblivious to that, but for me, that taunting, I received that as, oh, that's wrong. Like, that's not okay. That is looked at as weird, as abnormal, as something that shouldn't be happening. And that was basically the moment that I was like, okay, that's it. That will never happen to me again. I can never show anyone any feelings towards women. It shut it down to the point that like holding another woman's hand or looking at another woman too long in the eyes, to me I was like, oh, that's implying something. Like, they're gonna know something about me that I do not want them to know. So for years, I did that, and I had many times where I would just think to myself, okay, like, will I ever say anything? Will I ever change my life? And everything around me, a lot of which was influenced by family, my immediate family, basically said, that's not a thing, and it's not okay. So I had a lot of messaging with my mom specifically, who just said a lot of homophobic things in very rude and short comments. And even if, to this day, I don't know if she understands fully what that did to me and potentially to other people around her. So yeah, and it also influenced my life in a way where I didn't allow myself to fully feel emotions, including like things that I loved. For instance, ever since coming out, I am now like, oh wait, yeah, I love hiking. I did that when I was a kid, but never let myself actually like believe that I loved that. And honestly, since coming out, it's just been a whole different story. Like small things like that, small foods. I'm like, oh wait, I love this. Like why? I've never identified that before. I've never had like space to even think about those things in my life because I was spending so much of my time ignoring who I was. And yeah, so it got to a point where I remember crying in my bed after reading a post from one of my friend's friends of her coming out as bi, and I remember bawling my eyes out, just saying to myself, like, I have to make a decision. I have to either come out and potentially lose a lot of people in my life that I'm very worried about telling, or I repress this and I never ever show it. And I will say, actually, in that moment, I decided to repress it. I basically said to myself, well, here it goes. I'll probably have to marry a man, and I'll have to have kids, and I'll have to get married, and that's just going to be my life, because that's the heteronormative tradition that is put in front of a lot of kids. And ultimately ended up coming out after getting together with my girlfriend and so forth. But to touch on the family thing a little bit more, I will just say that I don't have a great relationship with my parents. I actually haven't seen them or really spoken to them in about 1.5 years. It got to a point where my mom and I had a very intense discussion where she basically just started accusing me of changing, being a different person, saying, well, what happens if you're walking down the street and a cis man like winks at you, like, what's that gonna mean? And will you, yeah, it was very complicated and bad. And yeah, just accused me basically of like saying it doesn't make sense and that it wasn't okay. And so for a couple months I kind of was like, okay, like, this is fine, actually maybe for a year. But I like barely could make eye contact with her. She wouldn't look my girlfriend in the eye. And I just said, okay, well, you need to figure something out and I can't be a part of that. I cannot take on the emotional labor of teaching you right now because it has been too intense for me. So I put the ball in her court to say, go and educate yourself, and I truthfully feel a lot of anger towards her, and so I haven't been able to get to a place where I feel comfortable kind of speaking to her again, and I don't think she understands how her words and her language and actions impacted me, and how hurtful and problematic they are. So I'm kind of hoping that that can be grasped. But yeah, we'll see. It's also kind of difficult because a couple years ago I had longer hair, and actually just as of last year, long hair, and I really just embraced my like gender expression in a whole new way. And one of my mom's biggest things that she said to me was, do me a favor and don't be butch. So, sorry mom, but things have changed. And yeah, I think for me, like the biggest hurdle that I have been overcoming is getting rid of that shame for myself. The shame that I felt for who I am, the shame that I felt from the people around me that said homophobic comments, like trying to get rid of that internalized homophobia that existed for so many years within me. And I can say it's like really, really difficult to do that work, and it hurts a lot. And at the same time, I wouldn't change it for anything because I now live my life in such a full and, like what Jay said, like authentic way. And I didn't even know living my life could feel like this. I thought what I was feeling before was just where I would be stuck. And it is like a sense of freedom I don't even know if there are words to describe. So my biggest, I guess, message is really trying to ensure for anyone that you know who might feel shame, like, it's not even like reassuring them, but it's just opening a dialogue that like those things that they might feel about themselves, that that's not wrong, they are not wrong for who they are. And I think it's really important for families and parents to have, that openness and to have those conversations, just as, Jace was saying, because it can make a huge impact and a huge, huge difference early on.
Thank you, Kaylin. So hi, my name is Aiden. My pronouns are they and them, and I identify as agender, transgender, and bisexual. I'm going to talk a little bit about coming out. So sometimes we talk about coming out like it's this big event and then everything is great, and sometimes that's true, but a lot of us come out a lot of different times over our life. First of all, because we meet new people, but also because we may change a little bit. You know, all of us grow and change. So the first time I came out, I was 11, and I came out as bisexual, although I did not know that that's what I was doing. I went to a very progressive summer camp one summer, and there was this girl there, and her name was Abby, and she was amazing, and I was a little girl, and she was a little girl, and I just thought she was so cool. And one day she said, "Can I kiss you?" And I said, "Absolutely." And we sort of like dated all through this summer camp. It was a very progressive summer camp. Like everybody was cool with it. It didn't occur to me that this was like even weird. I was like, everybody probably is into everybody, yeah? But so then I went home, and I didn't like tell my parents right away because I was like 11 or 12, and like who wants to be like, "Mom, I kissed him." So I just didn't think it was a big deal. But then, you know, junior high started, and all of my friends who were girls were talking about like crush on, and who they had kissed, and what base they got to with who. And I wanted to participate, and I said to one of my friends, well, you know, I had a girlfriend last summer, and she was like, okay. And I was like, awesome, this is gonna be fun. But actually it was a very small, very conservative town. And as sometimes happens, she told someone, who told someone, who told someone, who didn't think it was okay. And I walked into class one day, and to get to the little chair desks, you had to walk past the teacher's desk, which had a big computer monitor on it. And you used to, remember when you had screensavers that would like loop things on your computer? And some student had programmed it to say, my name is A, and it's that slur that starts with F. And the thing is, I don't know if at the time the teachers did not know, because this was the early 90s, how to fix that, or just did not care. But that message was on every computer screen, on every teacher's desk, in that whole school for a week. So after that, I didn't talk so much about it. I can tell you a little bit about when I did tell my mom. I was 16, if you're interested in that. That was a whole interesting thing. You could ask about that in Q&A. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that when you come out as a kid, it's very vulnerable, because you're dependent on your parents and your community for everything. You can't pick up and move to another town. You can't clothe and feed and shelter yourself. So that's an incredibly vulnerable position to be in. But when you come out as an adult, it's a whole other kind of vulnerability. So I knew I was bisexual from the time I was really little. I also knew that I didn't feel like a girl. And I didn't feel like a boy either, so I didn't really know what that was. I didn't have any language around that. And it took me a really, really long time to figure that out. And it took reading a lot of books and meeting a lot of people and getting appropriate medical care. And so I didn't come out as trans until I was 40. And when you come out as an adult, you have a whole life, right, that you have control over, and that's the great thing. But you also have a whole life with really high stakes that you could lose. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that happened. Way back, so I've been teaching, I teach college. I've been teaching college for 18 years. And again, 18 years ago, I couldn't have told you that I was trans. I didn't have that language, but I knew I was bisexual, and I knew there was something else going on. And I used to, so I teach first year college writing, and they used to have us teach this class, the theme of which was controversial issues. Give the students something to write about, I guess. And so we did all the things we did, you know, we did gun laws, and we did, you know, race and racism, and we did all these things. And we also did same-sex marriage, which at the time was not legal nationally. And it was still considered a controversial issue. And so I would get up in front of this classroom, and I'm very good at leading a difficult discussion. I'm very good at hopefully making other people feel very comfortable. And I could get up there and I could talk about race, and I could talk about class, and I could talk about gun laws. And every year when we started the same-sex marriage section, I would start to introduce the topic to my students, and I would have to turn away and face the board and write something, because my face would go bright red, and I just couldn't. And I had to take a moment because it hit too close to home. And I didn't know how to bring myself into that classroom, because that classroom's not about me, that's about my students, right? And that's true. But I think that as parents, and I am a parent, I have a daughter, a cisgender straight daughter, who's 26 now, and we do a lot of making things about other people and making things comfortable for other people, and that's our job as parents, it is. But there's a way in which I could show up for my students, I could show up for my daughter, that I really couldn't for myself. I knew I was trans by the time I was, I don't know, 35. But one day when I was 40, I was talking to my partner, Jace, who is newly my partner now. This is not the parent of my child. And they said, well, you identify as agender, you identify as trans. What pronouns do you want people to use for you? And I was like, oh, I don't care. And they were like, what do you mean you don't care? And I was like, well, pronouns are for other people. That's just what other people think of me. I know who I am, really, so I don't really care. And they were like, well, you could ask people to use other pronouns, and I was like, no, I couldn't. It would just be such a hassle for them, and it really doesn't matter. And they just looked at me and said, no, it wouldn't. And it was this life-changing moment, because I realized that if we want to show up for our kids, and we want to show up for our students, we also have to show up for ourselves, because first of all, we're worth it, and secondly, being who we are in these spaces means that we're giving other people the space to be who they are, even if they're incredibly different from us. So that's a little bit about me. So now, should we do those slides? Sure. Okay. So now is the part of the evening that was really fun. We are going to do a Q&A, and both Keelan and Jace mentioned this earlier, but we really do mean ask us anything. This is a really great space to ask questions that you're like, I don't know if I have the right language around this, or if I might make someone uncomfortable. We are totally unflappable. Worst case scenario, we're going to say, thank you for asking that. Here, probably don't ask a random queer on the street that question. Here's why, but we'll probably answer it for you anyway. So this is that part of the night. And to get us started off, though, we just want to talk through a few slides about how to be a supportive ally, because we know that all you guys are really interested in that. Do you guys want to talk through this? Okay, well, I'm going to talk through these slides. Okay, so the first one says being an ally is a noun. It's not a noun, it is a verb. And I think really what we want to get at is that being a good ally isn't just about what you think and what you say. It's also about showing up, again, for yourself, but also for other people who need you, and doing it over and over and over again. Be a good listener to people, to anyone, and to anyone who's different from you. But if somebody comes out to you as queer or trans or anything else, that means that they really trust you. And the best thing you can say to them, among other things that we can talk about, is thank you for telling me. One thing that's really important, not just for the people you're actually interacting with, but for making a world in which we all get to be who we are, is to just not make so many assumptions. And I know that's really hard, right? We are like a meaning-making species, and we want to put things into categories. But as much as you can, to not assume based on the way that somebody looks, or dresses, or presents themselves, or their name, anything about their sexual orientation, but also anything about their gender. Finally, don't out another person as LGBTQ plus to other people unless you know that that's what they want. We all told a little bit about different coming out experiences. A lot of us are different level, or were, not so much are anymore for me, but were sort of out at different levels in different spaces where it felt safer or more welcoming to do that. So just sort of be mindful of that, that if you have information about someone, that information is about them and for you and not for everybody else. I'll also tell just a really quick story about that. One of my best friends has a child who is agender. They're 14 now. And the child uses they, them pronouns, and the parent is a hairstylist, hairdresser. So it has like all these clients, and like part of being a hairdresser is you talk to your clients all the time, and so, you know, the friend uses they, them pronouns for the kid. And a lot of clients will ask my friend, they'll say, well, what does it mean? What does it mean that they, them pronouns? And my friend will just say, it means that they use they, them pronouns. And move on. And then finally, speak up if you hear somebody say something wrong. We are here to speak on all of this stuff, and we would like to think that we're courageous enough in every situation that if someone tells like a super offensive joke or gets something really wrong, that we would stand up for ourselves and for other people, but also sometimes that can be exhausting as the target of those jokes. So if you are a cis person and you want to be a good ally, if you're a straight person and you want to be a good ally, one thing to remember is that you never know who's in the room with you. And also, it's your job to stand up when things are wrong. Make sure that it's normalized to share pronouns. That's one way to not assume who someone is, right? And always make it optional. So in my classroom, we start every semester, and we do this several times so that we don't forget. You say, my name is Professor Clark, or Amy, you can call me Professor Clark, my pronouns are they and them. Please tell me your name, and if you're comfortable doing so, your pronouns. And I started doing this like way before I even like totally came out again in the classroom. And at first, like years ago, people were like very confused. I had to explain parts of speech a lot. But now it's like totally normal. Like if I forget for a minute, my students will be like, pronouns. All right, sorry. And then finally, keep educating yourself and keep supporting all kinds of organizations and causes when and if you are able to do so. So that's just a few little things on being an ally. But really, we would love to hear questions from you. You can ask us about our stories, something that caught your attention. You can ask us general questions that you have about any kind of LGBTQ plus stuff.
And I know we're a small group here, but we are also trying to record this. And as tempting as it might be for you to raise your voice and just shout your question at us, we would ask that you do use the microphone for the benefit of the recording that we're trying to do here today.
And if you're really not comfortable doing that, you can have somebody repeat it for you. But yeah, so does anybody have any questions? Great.
So I was wondering either if you have a good relationship with your parents or if you don't, if there are things that your parents said that were the right things to say, or if there were things that you really wish that your parents had said that they didn't.
You want to say that one?
All right, that's a great question. Thank you very much for asking it. I think it would have been amazing if I heard my parents, first of all, just avoid making extremely harmful judgments about other people, whether it's someone passing on the street, whether it's someone in the media, on the TV. Like, for example, like my mom, at one point, I forget what show we were watching as a family when I was in high school, but she would make comments like, there was a person who was bi represented in a show, and she was like, I don't understand that doesn't make sense. And even just that one comment told me that was not okay to her. So I was like, well, that's shut down. So avoiding judgments and speaking to them, but I think what I would have wanted to hear is essentially something along the lines of, you're not wrong for feeling and being who you are. You are not wrong for existing in your body in whatever way you want, or expressing yourself in whatever way you want, loving whoever you want. And if that changes, that's also okay. Stagnancy is not like the ideal or the perfect situation. So I think I would have loved to hear that, because I didn't know it existed. I was told and really kept onto one narrative, and I think if I understood that some of my thoughts that I was having were okay, and I was okay for who I was, that would have made, I think, a big difference.
So I'm going to say I had the blessing of coming out to my parents several times in several different ways. The first time was when I came out as a lesbian in college, and here's what I'm going to say. Like, my dad and I, our relationship is complicated for reasons way beyond gender and way beyond sexual orientation, but he knocked it out of the park. Like, when I came out to him as gay, when I was 19 years old, he said, "You are my daughter and I love you." Period. There was no anyway, there was no qualifier, there was no even so, even now, you are my daughter and I love you. Period. The second thing he asked me was does your mother know? Then, when I came out to him as trans, you are my son and I love you, period. Because that was the most important thing. He has since gone on, and my dad looks like, for all intents and purposes, he looks like he could be a priest, or a college history professor. He has that kind of look about him. And he's on, like, he works in hospital systems, and he's always on the LGBTQA, like, employee groups. And he's in such a position that when they raise and they say, we really think we need more gender-inclusive restrooms in this hospital, he says, I will work on that. And he can actually, like, do things about it. So that's been really incredible. So my dad, like, Sammy Sosa. But then my mom initially was really afraid for me. And like, so I think the other thing, like, it's really easy to say, like, it's really easy to get down on people about their initial reaction, or even like their initial feelings about something, because it's hard to, when you're the person coming out, when you're like really opening yourself up with all of these vulnerabilities, it's hard to not want that perfect reaction immediately, because it's, you know, you're putting yourself through so much, and this has been such an agonizing thing for so long for a lot of people, that having to finally say those words, if you don't get exactly what you want, it can really feel hard. But also, as parents, you're on a journey too, and whether your kid is trans or straight or anything else, you're on a journey with that little person, trying to make them not unalive themselves, and also to have a happy, healthy life, right? Like, that's kind of the whole point of things. So when my mom initially was like afraid for me, like, I was like, okay, like, I want you to have some other kind of reaction to this. You know, that was where it started, and that was, you know, when I came out as trans, was when she really was like this fear for my life and my well-being, which made sense at the time and still does now. But then, I don't know how long ago this was. It was probably on the range of like 5 years ago or so, maybe even longer than that. I came out to her in 2011. She called me at some point, she's like, Jace, did you know that in New Jersey, you could get your gender identity changed on your birth certificate if you want to? And I was like, oh, okay, thanks for telling me. I'm not interested in that, but that's lovely, thank you. You know, so that was like a real big breakthrough with her, just to kind of go from like this place of fear, this place of like, I don't know what this is gonna be like, to like, you have the ability to live a healthy life. So I acknowledge that parents are gonna be on a journey. Everybody's on a journey, we're all on this together. You have ideas for your children, you have ideas for who you want them to be, for who you want them to be, how they're gonna grow, how successful you want them to be, and what success looks like in your mind. And the bottom line is, that is your kid and you love them. And that's where you start.
And I'll just echo that really quickly by saying the best reaction I ever got actually was, I have an aunt who is a very fundamentalist Christian, and so when I came out as trans, I just didn't tell her, we're not that close, it didn't seem like a big deal, but my kid like really loves my aunt. So we went there for Easter, it was 2 years ago, and because my kid really wanted to go to the aunts for Easter, so I was like, okay. So we went there, and my aunt, who's this fundamentalist Christian, and has been since I was baby, like cornered me in the kitchen because I was like helping cook something, and was like, oh, the world is just going to hell, and I was like, oh no, this is going to go poorly. But then actually she was incredibly sympathetic, and what she was worried about was, you know, that we didn't have good gun control laws, and that why do we care how people want to identify when, you know, children are dying and they're starving, and I was so taken aback and so impressed that I actually couldn't say anything in the moment. But so then on the ride home, on the way home, I texted her and I said, you know, I wanted to, you know, thank you for that conversation in the kitchen. I wanted to let you know that actually that I'm trans and that I use they, them pronouns. And I wasn't sure if you would be okay with that. So I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. And she texted me and she said, thank you so much for letting me know. And I apologize if there's anything I've ever done in the past that didn't make you feel safe to tell me. And it's been fine ever since. That, I think, was the best reaction I ever got in the whole world. So. All right, other questions?
My question is similar to her question, but I'm a mom, I'm a 9-year-old and 5-year-old. What, in your opinion, can I do to raise them to be their most authentic self now? I mean, I guess as they're growing, but what do you think I could be doing, in your opinion?
I'll take this one because I raised one. I think that, you know, with anything, it really is about letting them try on all the things and anything. And I think there is right now So I came out as trans, 4 years ago, and at that time I felt like almost kind of guilty because I was like, I let all these other people do this first when it was really hard, and now I'm doing it when it's easy, and I felt terrible, and I will tell you, I do not feel that way anymore. Because it is increasingly dangerous socially, politically, and physically in the world for queer people in general and trans people specifically. So I would say, the first thing to do is you try to keep your children safe, you educate them about all that. But as this political backlash is happening, one of the things we hear all the time is like, well, why would we let a kid choose their own pronouns or change their name, or what if they regret it? It's probably just a phase. And I would say sometimes it is just a phase, and okay, cool phase, right? I also went through a phase when I was a skateboarder. I was so bad at that. But ultimately, it did not harm me in the long run to have tried, right? So I would say let your kids be whoever they are whenever they're trying that on, and let them know that you love them and that you believe them, that is who they are, and that if they change that someday, if they change anything about who they are, that is okay, and I think it is true that we have sometimes notions about, it's hard when our kids are not the same as us, right? When our kids are very different from us, that's hard. And I think that being okay with that is maybe the most important thing. And also just, giving lots of different experiences and talking about lots of different things and not making assumptions. And finally, the last thing I'll say on this is, we all do things wrong, over and over and over again as parents. But it's okay. And when you realize that you have, just cop to it and say you're sorry. My mother, I remember years ago, I was at the, no, that's not that story. Years ago, I was at my sister was graduating from this radiology school, and we were at the graduation ceremony, and my sister was there, in a little dress, graduating, my mom was there, and I was there, and I was wearing a button-down shirt and pants and little men's shoes, and there was a trans masculine student who graduated with my sister's class. And they were up at the buffet line getting food, and my mom and I were sitting at the table, and she looked up at that person, and she knew that this person was trans, not just sort of butch. And she just said, God, I just think it would be so hard to be the parent of that child. Because, when you have a baby, you think that baby's perfect exactly the way they are, and then they want to change things about themselves, and it would just be awful to be that parent. And I didn't forget that. But the thing is, neither did my mom, and when I did finally came out, she said, I remember that I said that, and I'm sorry. So, like all of us, cop to it, Any other questions? Anything else? Great.
Thank you for sharing all of your stories. So one of the questions I have is, you all shared that you went through several stages in your coming out, or kind of as you figured out who you were as a person. And one thing I sometimes see in kids is wanting to figure everything out right then, wanting to figure it all out. And I'm 47, almost 47, and I know that there's a lot of things that take a long time. And so how do you support both? Wanting to figure out everything immediately, but also understanding that sometimes things take time.
Yeah. So I worked with college students for a long time, and probably the thing that was most infuriating to me was that I would listen to sometimes their drama and be like, oh my God, this is really gonna be okay, and you're not gonna ever think about this test, you're not gonna think about this person, in 10 years, none of this will matter. And I had to really couch myself down and okay, yes, but and even more so, if you're younger than that, if you're in middle school, if you're in high school, if you're 5 or 10 years old, your life is so much shorter that every year feels so much longer, and figuring stuff out is hard. And there's also that I want to be a grown up, I want to have this autonomy, I want to do these things. So it's completely understandable that there is that impatience, because it's I just want to do the thing. I'm not a child psychologist. I am not a parent. But I think that it's just a lot of patience. And like what Aiden was saying with like letting kids try things out and like, you know, giving a lot of groundwork, giving a lot of latitude. I'll also say like my oldest nephew, he had a lot of anger issues, and whether it was like he's now been diagnosed with ADHD, and that's been super helpful. But when he was a kid, it was clear that like he had very deep feelings, but couldn't work any of them out. So the way that he would respond, because it was the easiest thing at his disposal, was anger. And he'd have these violent, like almost violent outbursts. And so my sister started getting him to see a psychologist, and that was really helpful for him, even since he kind of got out of that phase of like, you know, tantrums that were like 11 on a scale. You know, it helped him to figure out other ways of managing his emotions. So, you know, sometimes it might not be like as a parent that you have all of the answers or that you have all the tools in your own tool belt. And I think something that's really valid is saying, I need to tap in somebody else here. I need somebody's professional help to guide me through this. If there's other parent groups that you can tap into, if there's just anyone else who can share that experience with you and be like, you're not crazy, this is hard, but also like, what can you give your kid outside of your own like family environment that will help them also work through some of those really big feelings of like, these are all these things that are going on with me right now.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up on that to say, like, and also I think having different kinds of community resources and really availing yourself of them is really important, because a kid who might want to figure out everything about their sexual orientation and gender identity and gender presentation, all this stuff all at once, and is very impatient, is going to have a kind of support beyond your family if they have a whole queer community, right? Of people the same age who are also figuring that stuff out. Because yeah, like, you know, sometimes there are things that you're like, okay, this you're not going to know. You're not going to remember this test in 10 years, right? But also it is a big deal right now. And just in case, and I don't think this is true, I'm not making this assumption at all, but just in case like there is a question sometimes that we get that's behind the question, which is like, there's a lot of talk right now in the media about what do I do, you know, why would we let kids make these decisions? They're all gonna go on hormones and get irreversible surgeries, and then they're gonna grow up and they're gonna regret it, and what do? I can't let my kid make any of these choices. And I will say this, first of all, like, no one is handing out major surgeries, gender-affirming surgeries to children. Like, it just does not work that way. And the number of children who have any kind of, like, medical intervention before the age of 18 is extremely small. There are questions about puberty and puberty blockers that are really important if you have a child who's trans in your family, to talk to a doctor about that specifically. It's a decision that should be made between the doctor and the child and the parent, and not, for example, by the state. But also to remember that, like, we worry sometimes about our kids making choices that seem irreversible, but like, life is irreversible, right? You know, you choose to do ballet as a kid and your feet are never gonna look the same again. You choose to quit French lessons in 7th grade and you are never going to speak French that well ever again, right? But we have to let our children make some choices, and to be autonomous people, and to balance the idea that, like, yeah, we all grow and change, and to just be really open to the fact that we all grow and change throughout our lives, and if it turns out that you were wrong, that is okay, or you've changed your mind, you're right today, tomorrow you're right in a whole different way, like, that's fine. But also to avail yourself of all of those resources, because it turns out that, like, you know, we worry a lot about what's irreversible, particularly with trans kids. It's in the rhetoric, but like, life is irreversible. It just is. So that's what I say.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on both of their comments there and answers. I think one of the first things I would say is to, like what Ian was just mentioning, when it's about like exploring and honoring a kid's curiosities about life, any aspect of it, I think that's hugely important, and also allowing them and reminding them that like change is okay. I think sometimes like if they're, to me, if and this is just my personal opinion, but if there is like a rush to figure something out or make sure everything is in line or that they're still correct, like reminding them that there's a lot more fluidity and the need to get to some finish line doesn't really exist. That's my personal opinion, and I also think sometimes there's this aspect, speaking from, again, my experience, like this idea of being right. I think I've gone through most of my life thinking like there are certain things that are right and there are certain things that are wrong. And I always was striving to go and do things that were right and be right. And that led me down a horrible path. And when I now exist in a space where it's like, it's okay to make a choice and be wrong or have it not go well, that's okay. So that was a huge thing for me. And so the idea of supporting someone who is kind of working through change potentially, but also has a rush to get to some finish line and have it figured out, like, there's almost more under that to me, that like there's like a root cause of why they're feeling that. Like, what is that root? For me, it was understanding that I have this tendency to want to be right. And I am in therapy and I actively work to address that and release that and open myself up to not having a timeline for whatever reason I told myself I needed one. And so I think there's potentially a lot of space for there to be something under that tendency that that person leads that person to believe there's only one path, or even if they're on a different path, that they still have to like get to it by a certain age, by a certain date, with a certain group of people, whatever constrictions and rules they're putting around it, like there's potentially a lot more there, and I think that root cause is something to kind of further explore.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
I have another question. Often you hear, I guess, that it's really important for children to have someone that they can talk to, whether it be a parent, a friend, a coach, you know, some other trusted individual. Did any of you have someone in your lives like that when you were growing up younger, I guess?
That's a really good question.
I will say I did not. I mean, so I figured out that I was, okay. So it's complicated sitting up here and like looking like this and being like, when I was a little girl. But yes, it's, you know, complicated histories. But so when I was little and I was still a girl, and the other interesting part about my identity is I had no problem identifying as a girl. It was when suddenly I had to be a woman that everything got way more complicated, because everything like then it was like, oh, what? So when I was a girl, I remember when I was in middle school, no, high school, I was convinced that, like, I knew that I was interested, that I was attracted to other girls. Like, I knew that that was a thing. I was convinced that I was the only person in the world who felt this way, because I didn't have any, like, you know, this is like the 1990s. There wasn't a ton out there in the world at that point that like showed you that you could be happy and healthy and be a queer adult. Like, where were those examples? So I didn't have, like, there was no friend that I really could talk to. There was no person that I really had around me. But my guidance counselor, with whom I had a very good relationship, which I think is unusual for high school students to have a good relationship with their guidance counselor. Yeah. He was great, and he was like, you were definitely not the only one. If I could tell you how many other people have come in here and said the same thing to me, you know, you would feel much better, because you know you're not the only one. But I still didn't see the examples, you know. And similarly, when I did have somebody that I told, who was my peer, it turned into a whole thing. I had the same, it was a different situation, but I had, it got around, you know, oh, Julie is a lesbian. And so one day, somebody who I thought was a friend, and so yeah, well, this happens all the time, printed a sign that said lesbo with an arrow pointing to it and taped it up on the sign outside of my house that was pointing out my house. And my family was coming from church this Sunday, and it was like, typically we'd never come from that direction except when we were coming home from Mass. And so we were coming down the street in that direction to see this sign and see this. So I learned very quickly that no, there was nobody for me to talk to. And the reason why I do this, and the reason why I am out, and the reason why I try to be out in as many ways as possible, and the reason why, you know, with their, you know, child, who now uses they and them pronouns, like, the importance of being visible is so important because, like, that would have been so much, that would have clued me into something at that age. But now I feel like it's different, potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, I think to that point, it kind of feels different to me. I think when I was growing up, like, I did not have, definitely didn't have anyone to talk to, and almost in a, like, extreme way, because I had a lot of internalized homophobia from what I was seeing around me. Like, even just having this question asked, like, hearing what Jay said, like, I kind of been realizing that, like, I was pretty scared of queer people, because to me, like, that's what I was told I cannot be like. So even if, like, because I had queer people in my life, my cousin is a trans man, and, like, in college had a decent number of friends who were out, and it's like, even with those people in my life in some capacity, it scared me. Like, I wasn't seeking any support, and I also wasn't seeing it in a quote-unquote normalized way, in the sense that, like, even if you have a queer person in your life, like, when I was growing up, it wasn't that you had them in your life and you saw them in the media, and you saw them in shows, and you heard or had community resources. Like, that was so limited, so I had no perspective that it existed, basically, outside of this bubble. So I didn't have anyone, and interestingly enough, I think I avoided any opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think it's one of those questions that is so good because nobody's ever asked me that before, actually, and it's sort of devastating to answer because, again, I would answer no. I didn't have that at all. And it didn't even occur to me that I could, actually, but it was a different time, and I think, if you're a parent, the more people you can have in your kid's life, healthy, happy people you can have in your kid's life, the better, right? And if you are that person for someone else, if you are the teacher or the school counselor or the coach, or the, friend's weird mom, or like whatever, like, understand how important that is for other kids to be able to just have a safe grown-up to talk to. Like I said, I've been teaching for 18 years, and it's heartbreaking how many college students even I see who come in who don't have safe grown-up people. Technically they're grown-ups, right? They're 18, but who don't have safe adult people to talk to. And how many students I have had to, on occasion, be like, here's my phone number, you can text me just if you need a safe grown-up. Can't solve your problems, but you can text me. But so if you can be that person for somebody, I think that's amazing.
And two, I want to also absolve you of this idea that you have to be perfect about it too. Like, honestly, like just being there to listen and also acknowledging, like, I don't know all of this. Like, if you're not an expert on what it means to be trans, because here's the other thing too, the other secret is that none of us are actually experts at this. I have probably about 15 years of experience at this point teaching and training on LGBT issues. And I don't consider myself an expert because all I know is that every time I complain that we have too many genders, some other young person comes up with another gender for me to have to learn about. So, like, there's always another thing to learn because human beings are dynamic. We are not static. We are you're not like, and it is too complicated to put any part of our identity into a box, right? So, you know, like, there's never gonna be a time at which I'm gonna know everything there is to know about being trans. I know, I'm an expert on me, right? And, you know, like, one of the analogies that I always used when people would, like, when we have all these definitions, we would go through, the first thing we'd always do in our LGBT 101s would be like, here are all of the words and their definitions. And be like, okay, so these are great because they at least let you know that there are other people who have different ways of experiencing the world. But if you're gonna tell me you're gay, that's like telling me your zip code. I want you to tell me about your house. What does that mean for you? What does your experience being in that community be like? What is your experience of being in that community like? What does it mean for you to be gay? What is it like? Because if you ask me more about my gender, I would say yes. Like, I identify as a trans man, all one word. I do not identify as a man. I do not feel like a dude. I do not feel like somebody. But and you know, and it's not true for every trans person to feel that way. Some trans people are what you would call completely stealth. You would never know, and they would never talk about it. And as far as they're concerned, their experience as another gender never happened. And then you have people who live on this lovely spectrum of identity where one day they'll come in and they'll have fabulous nails and long hair and wearing a dress, and the next day they'll come in and they'll be totally butched up, and you're like, oh, right? So it's a roundabout way of saying, I'm sorry, getting on a tangent. But like, to be a person who doesn't make assumptions, who listens well, all those good ally things that are somewhere over my head right now are all really important. And really, you don't have to be perfect. None of us is going to be perfect at this. But we can be compassionate, and we can listen, and we can be supportive.
Thank you. Now we have a question over here.
Okay, I'm horrified about like talking in public ever. But I just want to say I have actually known Aiden for 26 years.
Hi, Becca. We went to college.
But I can also testify to the fact that like a later in life transition is fascinating and interesting, and it's actually still something for me to get used to, like the name change. And see, I know you as Amy. And it's an interesting and amazing and cool thing to transition with you into. But I just want to bring something up that I think we've talked about how maybe in the 90s, you know, there were these attitudes floating around, and maybe those attitudes are not so much there now, so things might be safer for our kids. And maybe our kids kind of feel comfortable, like walking around saying, hey, I'm this, hey, I'm that, in a way that we never would when we were younger. And yet there's also a step up in attitudes against trans people and against LGBTQ, and even against parents for being groomers of children. And I just want to know if you have any thoughts about how we ride those waves, because they're complicated and it's crazy. And I'm raising a 9-year-old, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard. And, you know, I think things are very different than they were when I was a kid. And there are a lot of things that if you had told me when I was a kid that same-sex marriage would be legal in my lifetime, I wouldn't have believed you. If you had told me that I could get an X as a gender marker on my ID, my mind would have been blown. If you told me that I would have worked in a place that has gender-neutral restaurant, gender-inclusive restrooms, I would have been like, what is that? So, I mean, in some ways we've made like enormous amount of progress, you know, and I said briefly earlier that when I came out, I felt guilty. I felt guilty because I felt like I had waited until it got easy to do this, and that I should have been out there doing it when it was hard, with the people who really had to do it when it was hard, and I don't feel that way anymore, because one way of looking at what's happening now is that it's this sort of last dying gasp of people who have controlled, a very small group of people who have controlled the order of things for a very large group of people for a very long time, and they're now going to have to confront the fact that they can't anymore. But even if that's true, that last dying gasp is desperately dangerous for a lot of us. And not just as queer people and as trans people who walk out into the world, and queer and trans kids right? So much of the spotlight is on children. And, you know, it's better to be gay now than it was when I was a kid in some ways. But also, I could hide. And that was fine, right? As long as I could hide, I could kind of do whatever I wanted. And you can't hide anymore. There's this enormous spotlight on your children, and it's not fair. And so I think, you know, first of all, protecting queer and trans youth, but also that it's, as you mentioned, like it's incredibly difficult. Like I'm a parent, but I'm also, you know, a teacher. I'm an educator. Like, and the kind of accusations that get made against people like me just for existing in a room with children sometimes is terrifying. And don't think that I don't think about this all the time. Jason and I were traveling on a plane a couple of years ago, last year we went to Philadelphia, and you know, Jace looks like this, and there were, and you know, and we also look, we could sort of look straight if we have to, but we also look very queer. We kind of look straight sometimes. Somebody once told me, I don't know. But we also look like, we were very clearly like a queer couple, and there was a mom with a little kid, like, you know, I don't know, 18-month kid who was just like completely adorable and was doing the little kid thing in the seat like next to us. And Jace was like looking at the kid and like smiling and waving, and I was like, don't you dare. I was like, you cannot look at this child, you cannot interact with this child, you have no idea who these people are, it is not safe anymore. And that's a terrible thought to have. But it is, you know, reality. So how do we ride it out? I mean, I think a big part of it is that we have to make community with each other, and we have to not be quiet every time we see. It's really easy sometimes in Massachusetts to be like, oh, but it's gonna be fine here, right? And we read about all of these laws, you know, trans students can't participate in sports, can't use the restroom, you know, can't access gender-affirming care, but now, you know, they're coming for trans adults and our medical care, and you know, just basic, like, human rights protections for queer people, you know, for gay and lesbian, bisexual people even, are all under attack. And I think that, you know, we need to speak up every time we see that somewhere else and keep that in the conversation. And for a couple reasons. One, right, maybe we can move the needle. Two, it's our responsibility to keep other people safe. But three, the more you talk about what's happening with that terrible rhetoric out loud in your community, the more you will be able to identify the other people who agree with you. And those are the people who support you if they come for you, just like you would do for them. So I think, like, that's a really big part of it. But, you know, we'll see. We work on it, right?
And this is the part of the presentation where I remind you that you can vote. Yeah, like, and I really hope kids can, you know, like in a lot of cases, you're voting for your children. You're voting for their ability to do things because they can't. I remember in 2016, when was it that the law was passed here? The trans protections in the, was that 2000? No, it must have been 2018 or 2019. Anyway, there was a law that was being passed, and I worked for a little while in Bagley. I was an adult advisor for Bagley, which is the Boston area gay and lesbian youth. Now it's this Boston area queer youth organization. And they were doing phone banking to call different people in Massachusetts to tell them to vote in favor of this law. And these were kids who were like 16 years old. First of all, who were telling these people, I need you to vote so that I can exist and be comfortable and safe. Two, they were absorbing an incredible amount of backlash from just personally calling some of these people in different parts of the state, and like their enormous bravery in doing that was incredible. But like, yeah, it doesn't matter how insignificant that election seems, it is incredibly significant. I mean, even in our areas, like when you look at the school board, or what did you have? It wasn't just the school board, there was something.
The school board, the library board, all of your local town politics are more important now than ever.
But there was one in particular that was like, it was like for public, I can't remember. It was like public health, no, I can't remember. But it was like something about the usage of grounds in Dedham. That, like, I can't remember who it was, but anyway, but like all of these things, your town councilors, like, they're all so important. We have this person, Lindsay, who puts herself in every year for the school board. Her name is Liberty. heaven help me and heaven help me, but she's this like ban all of the books, we need to get DEI out of our things, and she keeps coming up. And like people are like, oh, she's my bullet vote. She's the one that's gonna get my one vote out of the 3 that I can have for the school board elections. And I'm like, oh my God, like, it's so important. So PSA, vote. And also talk to other people. Like my mom, like I mentioned before, my mom's family is all out in Ohio. I have this awesome uncle that I'm pretty sure is gonna vote for Trump again. And I told my mom, I was like, look, like, he wants us to come out for his 60th birthday. I feel afraid for my life when I go to Ohio. They live in somewhere between Cleveland and Columbus. It's like this big red patch. And not only is it a big red patch, but it is like rural. I thought he used the bathroom at some sketchy gas stations. And, you know, and I can protect myself in so much as I can change how I look. But heaven forbid I was in a car accident. And I am incredibly vulnerable in 2 places. I am incredibly vulnerable in locker rooms, and I'm incredibly vulnerable when it comes to medical care. And that is a sucky place to be when you are trans and you are traveling in a place that you do not know if you get adequate health care if you need it. So I'm actually afraid to go and celebrate my uncle's 60th birthday with him, and he might turn around and vote for Trump because he thinks that the economy was better at that point. So I told my mom this. I was like, Mom, it terrifies me to go to Ohio and see our family. The hope being that she will also communicate this to him so that maybe I can avoid having a difficult conversation with him. But if I have to have it, to tell him, like, Uncle Tom, you love me. I'm afraid. That is an important message to share across state lines as well when it comes to it.
I think we have time for like 2 more questions. Yeah.
Speaking a little to what you were speaking about, Aiden, and thank you, Jace, about, you know, healthcare. I'm a nurse at Anna Jake's, and we're trying very hard to educate and support staff. I'm finding it challenging to be a good ally because I feel like sometimes I'm shutting down the conversation and polarizing things because I just don't want to hear their rhetoric. So I don't know how to go about gently listening to some things that sound so wrong in order for them to listen to me.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I think in a healthcare setting in particular, and I'll let Jay speak more to this, because one of the things we talk about often at events like this is like we're both trans, and we're both queer, and we're vulnerable in totally different ways. Like I'm much more vulnerable on the street. I get harassed on the subway sometimes, on the street. And most people look at Jason just see like a dude, so like they're fine. But then, if we're in the hospital, worst thing that happens to me is I get misgendered, which sucks, but I'll survive. Inappropriate healthcare, because you have anatomy that your doctor doesn't expect, is a much bigger problem for your ability to stay alive. So, I don't know, but I think like in a healthcare setting, the most important thing is, I imagine, just like as a teacher, is to say, like, you don't have to like your patients, you get to go home, right? Like, that's why you have friends. Like, you don't have to like them. But you do have to make sure that you're doing your job. And part of basic medical care is not making assumptions about people's anatomy that could be wrong. We talk about this a lot in health classes. It's my favorite thing to talk about, actually, because I love I think biology is totally fascinating, right? And so, I think sometimes we ask people, when the 2 of us speak together, like, which one of us do you think has a uterus? Yeah, it's that one, right? Not this one, right? Or like, if you look at, like, also there's so much that's not well understood about, what we call gender and biological sex, right? More than 1% of the population is intersex, is medically intersex, right? Or you look at like what makes you qualify as whatever gender, right? You look at like, people are all concerned about hormone levels in sports, right? So, Jason and I both take synthetic testosterone as part of our medical care. They take 1/3 more than I do, right? But because it's synthetic hormone, one of the things we have to do is go get our hormone levels tested. cis people never have to get their hormone levels tested, so you would have no idea what your testosterone level is, your estrogen level. The idea that they're opposites is not medically accurate, but so we go and get tested like every year now, and Jace's testosterone level is at about 350. Mine's at 1,000, right? So you just can't make assumptions in a medical setting about people's bodies like that because it's dangerous. And I think that that's the only thing that you have to communicate in the medical setting. You know, appropriate medical care is not making assumptions. Appropriate medical care is asking people asking patients and being respectful of patients and using the patient's name and pronouns correctly so that they can trust you enough to give them care. And I don't actually care if my doctor thinks all kinds of terrible things about me. Again, that's why I have friends. I just care that I get adequate and safe care, and that my partner can get adequate and safe care.
So what Jace was just saying to me was like discussing and talking about people who have different opinions, and actually like that's exactly kind of where my head went to when you were asking that, because one of the biggest things that I think, and first of all I will say thank you for speaking out when you have the opportunity to, even if it doesn't feel like it, you are making probably someone, if not multiple people in that room feel safe and feel supported, and I think that is huge. So I hope that you continue to do it, and to that point, like marking the moment is something that I have been trying to implement in my own life, even if it's the smallest of comments, marking the moment to that person so that someone identifies that was not okay to say or that was an inappropriate comment is huge. Even if you don't have the perfect response or the perfect language around it, you've at least said something. And I think having a conversation or trying to listen or have a dialogue with someone with different opinions, what I have been implementing and learning a lot about is if someone, says an inappropriate comment, what can be really, really powerful in that moment is to ask them why they said that. Not necessarily, not saying like, you're wrong, like, you can't say that, just say, why did you say that? Why did you use that term? Why are you calling this person X? Because it turns it on them, and it says like, you need to now think about why you said that, because some people might not, and some people might know very well, and then get very sheepish, and then not say anything. And it can, again, be very small, it can be for a big comment, it can be for any number of reasons too. I mean, I had an experience last summer where I had this like, I don't know, maybe 18, 20-year-old cis boy who called me fat and disgusting. And it was this whole thing, and like beach patrol came over and whatnot, but I just asked him, I was like, why did you say that to me? And that can be a really powerful thing. And that is something that I have been implementing when I'm talking to someone who has a different opinion, or when I hear someone say something that doesn't like sit well with me and doesn't feel like it's creating a safe space for those around me. And it's really powerful to be able to do that too, as an ally. That's because there could be people in that room again who may not have the emotional capacity to do that. And I've been in that situation where like my girlfriend has stepped in or my friends have stepped in because I freeze and I can't. So I hope you continue to mark the moment and use your voice and appreciate that that is something that you're doing.
And I'll just say too, there are some opinions that do not deserve airtime.
Yeah.
Right, like, if it is just wrong and you're like, you can be like, look, okay, and yes, like, your opinions are your opinions. What matters is that you are treating your patients. We also know that that creeps into medical care. We know that your personal biases do creep into how you treat patients. And it is important to, like, it might not be something that, like, you in that moment can change that person, And that just might need to be something that is reported or sent someplace or alerted to somebody else to be like, this is creating a barrier to medical care for groups of people who need it. And this is what I am recognizing from this particular individual. So if it really is like we do not want that here, that's where I would go with that.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes hard to do, but it's also important, if you can, to distinguish between good faith and bad faith arguments, right? Because a good faith argument can always be engaged. People have different experiences, you know, and come from different places, and really can learn and change, right? But there are also bad faith arguments, and there's a lot of those out there too. And if it is a bad faith argument, yeah, you don't have to engage with it, because again, it's like talking with a refrigerator, right? The light goes on, the light goes off. It's not going to do anything unexpected. It just needs to be removed from the situation, right? So you don't have to engage with it, but you may need to, especially if like a medical setting, you may need to report to somebody that this person can't work with patients. So, yeah. We have time for one more question. Yeah, great.
Thank you so much for being here. This is so interesting and helpful. I'm gay, so I can relate to a lot of the things you're saying. My pronouns are he and him. And I totally get what you were just explaining, but one of the things that I encounter all the time that drives me crazy are microaggressions. You know, those sorts of, situations where maybe it's super uncomfortable to sort of challenge the statement. I guess an example would be something like somebody who knows your pronouns but consistently doesn't respect them. You know, somebody who doesn't send their kid to your sleepover because she's uncomfortable sending her kid to that household. You know, somebody who at a dinner party throws his hands in the air and says, cis, trans, bi, queer, I can't keep track of this, you know, and just brushes it off. You know, microaggressions like that. What do you suggest? You know, how do you cope?
Well, there's coping with it, and then there's addressing it, right? So there's the two sides of this. And this is really where, like, these are some of the most important places for people who are not from the targeted group to step in, because it gets so wearing. For yourself, like I have a lot of friends in the Black community, and like, you know, for a while there, we were kind of reaching out to each other when we would see something like, she would write to me and be like, oh, I just saw this thing happen with like this trans person, I'm thinking of you and I love you and I support you. And I'd say, oh my gosh, I just saw this terrible thing happen to some Black person in some part of the country, all over the place all the time. I'm thinking of you and I love you. And at some point, I wrote to her and I was like, I saw the news today and I just want to say I'm thinking about you. And she was like, I can't even pay attention to it anymore, because it is just like, if I need to be able to be a human being, I cannot be in this headspace anymore. And he's like, that's the big stuff, right? Like that's the stuff that's on the national level that like we trade off who reads certain newspaper articles in the morning. Like we're like, you don't need to read this one, I read it for you, it was bad. But like when it comes to those little things that are those daily things, and it's like, the other thing that's so frustrating is like, you're the person who's receiving all this stuff, right? So you're the parent who's like, kids' friends won't let them come over, or you're the one who's hearing the person say, oh, trans, cis, I can't keep track, or whatever. And like, there's a point at which you might break and say, but it matters. And then they'll be like, but that wasn't a big deal what I just said. But you're like, you're the 13th person I've heard say something like that today. You know, like your lucky number came up and I couldn't take it anymore, and that was the one that broke it for me. And like, this is why we say it's so important, and it's hard to identify sometimes because the microaggressions are the things that seem so innocuous. It's like, you know, like, was that actually a transphobic comment? I don't know. Was it really that that person wasn't seen when they were standing there? I'm not sure. Is it really that that person is not trying with this person's pronouns, or is it just hard because they've known them for so long in this way and it's hard for them to flip that switch? And that's when it's so important for other people to step in, because it really does. When you're on the other side of that constantly, day in and day out, and we hear it in all sorts of different ways from all sorts of very well-meaning people and all sorts of different, like, who have all kinds of different attitudes, some of which we know and love. To be the person who starts to clue yourself in to those things, to hear it and to have some kind of tingle in the back of your head and go, wait, I don't know about that comment I just heard. And to be the one who says, explain that to me, like, what do you mean when you say you can't keep track of them all? Like, what do you mean when, like, oh, Aiden uses they pronouns. Aiden uses they pronouns. Aiden uses they pronouns for the 300th time. You know, to be that other person who can step in there. As a person who's dealing with it, I find that community is the only way to do it. But like, I mean, my heart breaks when we talk about the kids, because then it's impacting your kids too. And it's like, but my kids, like, it's not, it's my life, it's not theirs, but it is theirs, and it is in part of this, and like, how does that manifest there? Yeah, you need to have some community, and you need to have some support, and you need to have somebody else you can turn to and say, I'm not insane, right? Like, this is actually happening, and that was actually really messed up. And, right, I can feel that that was messed up, and we can agree that that was messed up, like, but how do you, like, they're never gonna stop. Because we always make assumptions, we always have our off-the-cuff comment that we make with those particular people where we're like, I'm the person who can say whatever because I'm just that way with all groups, so it doesn't matter, I mean that about everybody, like, yeah, like, it's always gonna happen. It can't always be you who's the one who says something. We need support of each other, we need other people to step forward and say the thing. Yeah, but I feel you.
Okay, I actually think that's a really good place to leave it, but what we are going to do is hang out for a little while. We'll come on down. If you have questions you didn't want to ask on the mic or in front of the whole group, come and talk to us. There is more information, so we have the sort of how to be a good ally slides, and we can go through those with you again if you want. You can come up and ask. And there's some more packet information that's going out at a different event. But yeah, and also like if you have questions literally about anything, just come and hang out with us. All right, thank you all very much, and we really appreciate you having us.